The story began on a warm summer morning in Virginia, where the air was thick with humidity, and I could feel my scarf sticking to my neck as I stood outside the unassuming brick house. This was my first job in the United States, far from the dusty roads of Bala, where I had grown up. Back home, I had never imagined leaving my family or my familiar world, but life has a way of surprising us. The Jacobs, a seemingly perfect family of four, needed a nanny, and I needed the income. It wasn't just about the salary. It was about proving to my family that I could succeed, that I could thrive in a country so different from my own. At 33, unmarried and fiercely independent, I was a rarity in Jordanian culture. Brianna Jacobs, the wife, was elegant and breathtaking, dressed in tailored blouses and designer heels that clicked on the marble floors of their spacious home. She greeted me with a warm smile, her blonde hair neatly tied up, and spoke in that methodical way Americans do, as if every word she said was important. Then there was Zach J. Jacobs, the husband. He was tall, with a natural charm that made you feel instantly comfortable. His sandy brown hair curled slightly at the ends, and the laugh lines around his eyes suggested a man who had known joy, not just stress. He didn't say much that day, simply nodded politely and handed me a cup of tea. Their children, Splendor and Emmanuel, were 5 and 3, full of energy and nonstop questions. I was nervous, of course, as I'd never worked as a nanny before, but Brianna reassured me that my experience as the oldest of 6 siblings would be enough. She was kind, but I could sense her perfectionism. She handed me a thick binder filled with rules, meal plans, daily schedules, emergency contacts, and even laundry folding instructions. The first few weeks were uneventful. I would wake up at 6 a.m., make breakfast, pack Splendor's lunch for school, and keep Emmanuel entertained until nap time. My days were filled with storybooks, finger painting, and chasing Emmanuel around the backyard. At night, I would retreat to my small room in the basement, tired but content. It wasn't until one afternoon, about a month into the job, that I realized Zach was watching me. I was sitting on the kitchen floor cleaning up a spill Emmanuel had made with his juice box when I felt his gaze on me. "You're amazing with them," he said, leaning against the counter. I looked up, startled. "Oh, thank you, sir." "Please, call me Zach," he said with a smile. I nodded, feeling my cheeks flush. It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it. Like he truly meant it. Back home, men rarely spoke to women with such kindness unless they had an agenda. But Zach seemed different. From that day on, I started noticing him more. How he always asked if I had eaten lunch, how he offered to help carry the groceries, and how he lingered in the kitchen when I cooked. Brianna, on the other hand, was often absent, caught up in her demanding corporate career. "Don't you ever get tired?" Zach asked one evening as I was setting the dining table. "Tired of what?" I asked. "Tired of doing everything for everyone." I shrugged. "It's my job. I'm used to it." "You shouldn't have to be," he said softly, his words lingering long after he left the room. It was strange to be seen like that. In my culture, women were expected to serve without question, but Zach's words made me feel valued. I tried to push the feeling away, reminding myself of who I was and what I believed in. I was a Muslim woman, bound by faith and tradition, and there were lines I could never cross, no matter how kind or attractive my employer was. But as the summer went on, life had other plans. The days stretched on, long and hot, and Brianna's work trips became more frequent, leaving Zach and me alone with the children. Gradually, the boundaries between us began to blur. At first, it was harmless. Shared jokes, stolen glances, and casual conversations that lasted a little longer than they should have. But deep down, I knew I was stepping into dangerous territory. I often thought of my mother's voice, stern and unwavering. "Aaliyah, remember who you are. This world will tempt you, but you must stay true to yourself." I had always prided myself on my self-discipline, my ability to resist the temptations of modern life. But Zach was different. One rainy evening, everything changed. The children were asleep, and the house was quiet except for the rain tapping against the windows. I was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner when Zach walked in. "Need some help?" he asked, rolling up his sleeves. "No, it's fine. I'm almost done," I replied, but he stayed anyway. We worked in silence for a while, the air heavy with unspoken words. Finally, he broke the silence. "Do you ever miss home?" he asked. "Every day," I admitted, "but I came here for a reason." "You've sacrificed so much," he said, his voice filled with admiration. I looked at him, surprised. "Why do you say that?" "Because I see it. The way you put everyone else first. The way you never complain. It's rare." His words took me off guard. No one had ever spoken to me that way, not even back home. A strange mix of gratitude and guilt washed over me, as though simply listening to him was a betrayal. "It's nothing special," I said, brushing off the compliment. "It is to me," he replied, his gaze meeting mine, and in that moment something shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but there was a connection, a spark, a silent recognition of something neither of us dared to name. I went to bed that night with a heavy heart, torn between my faith and the growing feelings I couldn't ignore. I prayed for strength, for clarity, for the courage to stay on the right path. But deep down, I knew my life was about to change in ways I hadn't anticipated. I thought I could keep things professional, that any fleeting connection I felt with Zach would fade like a passing cloud. But life rarely works that way. Each day brought new moments, small and seemingly insignificant, but each chipped away at the wall I'd built around my heart. Brianna's absence became routine. She was off to conferences in New York, business meetings in Chicago, or overnight stays at luxury hotels I had only seen in magazines. Zach became the constant parent, and I became his partner in the daily chaos of raising Splendor and Emmanuel. The children adored him. Splendor would climb onto his lap during story time, her small hands clutching his shirt as he read aloud in funny voices. Emmanuel followed him around like a shadow, mimicking his every move. Watching them together, I saw a side of Zach that was tender and vulnerable, and it stirred something in me I couldn't quite explain. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry in the living room, Zach came in carrying a box. "I thought you might like this," he said, setting it on the coffee table. "What is it?" I asked, wiping my hands on my apron. He opened the box to reveal a set of cookbooks. "I noticed you've been trying new recipes lately. Thought this might inspire you." I stood speechless, not because of the gift itself, but because of the thought behind it. No one had ever noticed the little things I did, let alone appreciated them. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. "It's nothing," he replied, but the way he looked at me said otherwise. That evening, after the children were asleep, Zach and I found ourselves in the kitchen once again. It had become a sort of ritual, these quiet moments after the chaos of the day. I was wiping down the counters when he spoke. "You work too hard, Aaliyah." I looked up, startled. "It's my job." "No," he said, shaking his head. "You do more than your job. You care. You love these kids like they're your own. They're easy to love," I said, trying to deflect. "So are you," he said, and the words hung between us, heavy and dangerous. I froze, unsure how to respond. "Aaliyah," he started, but before he could say more, he quickly interrupted himself. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that, but I did." "No, it's okay," I responded, even though it wasn't. We stood there in silence, the weight of his words hanging heavily between us. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I wasn't easy to love, that I was complicated, flawed, and bound by rules he could never understand. Instead, I kept quiet. The days passed in a blur, and I tried to convince myself that nothing had changed. Yet deep down, I knew it had. Zach's presence seemed to be everywhere. His laughter echoed through the house. His scent lingered in the air, and his voice replayed in my mind long after he was gone. I began noticing small things about him. The way his eyes creased when he smiled, how he hummed while doing dishes, and how he always made sure the children said please and thank you. He wasn't just kind. He was thoughtful in a way that felt rare and precious. One afternoon, while I was pushing Splendor on the swing in the backyard, Zach came out with a tray of iced tea. "Thought you might need a break," he said, handing me a glass. "Thank you," I replied, taking it gratefully. We sat on the porch steps watching the children play. Do you ever think about what your life could have been? He suddenly asked. Surprised, I looked at him. What do you mean? I asked. I mean, if you'd stayed in Bala, if you hadn't come here, he said. I think about it all the time, I admitted, but I came here for a reason. And have you found it? He asked, his gaze steady. I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. In some ways, yes, but in others, it's complicated, I finally replied. He nodded as though he understood. Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? He said. It does, I agreed, my voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, we sat there in silence, the air thick with unspoken words. I wanted to tell him how much his kindness meant to me, how his presence had become a comfort in a world that often felt lonely and foreign, but I couldn't. I wouldn't. That night, I lay awake in my room, staring at the ceiling. I thought of my family back home, of my mother's prayers and my father's stern warnings. Stay true to your faith, they had always said. Never forget who you are. I wanted to believe I was still that girl, the one who prayed 5 times a day and wore her scarf with pride. But the truth was I was changing, and it terrified me. The next morning, I tried to avoid Zach as much as possible. I kept busy with chores, focusing my mind on my tasks. But by the afternoon, it was impossible to avoid him. He found me in the laundry room, sorting through a pile of clothes. Aaliyah, he said softly. I didn't look up. Yes? Are you okay? He asked. I'm fine, I said quickly, but he didn't believe me. Please don't shut me out, he said, stepping closer. I know I crossed the line. It's not about you, I interrupted, finally looking at him. It's about me, my beliefs, my faith. I understand, he said, but the look in his eyes told me that he didn't. How could he? I can't, I began, but the words caught in my throat. I can't do this. He nodded slowly, his expression filled with regret. I'm sorry, Aaliyah. I never wanted to make you uncomfortable. You didn't, I said quickly. That's the problem. For a moment, we just stood there, the silence between us saying all the things we couldn't. I'll give you space, he said finally. Thank you, I whispered, my voice trembling. As he left the room, I felt a wave of relief mixed with an ache I couldn't name. I knew I was doing the right thing, but it didn't make it any easier. That night, I prayed harder than I ever had before. I prayed for strength, for guidance, for the courage to stay true to myself. And as I knelt on the floor, tears streaming down my face, I realized something. I wasn't just fighting temptation. I was fighting a part of myself I didn't recognize. The days after our conversation in the laundry room were tense but manageable. Zach kept his promise to give me space, and I did everything I could to refocus on my job. I threw myself into caring for Splendor and Emmanuel, planning crafts and baking projects that kept us all busy from morning until bedtime. But even as my hands stayed occupied, my mind wandered to him. Zach remained cordial, almost distant, and I convinced myself that this was the best way forward. We could pretend nothing had happened, that the words we shared in the laundry room were just a fleeting moment of weakness. For a while, it almost worked. Then came the storm. It was a Friday evening just after sunset when the rain began. The thunder rolled in first, shaking the windows and startling Emmanuel, who clung to my leg as I cleaned up the dinner table. Don't worry, Emmanuel, I said, scooping him up. It's just a little noise. Let me get you ready for bed, okay? I carried him upstairs, reading his favorite bedtime story while the rain poured outside. By the time both kids were asleep, the storm had intensified. The wind howled, and the house felt eerily quiet despite the chaos outside. I headed downstairs, expecting to find Zach in his usual spot on the couch. Instead, I found him in the kitchen, staring out the window with a glass of wine in his hand. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and the soft glow of the kitchen light highlighted the sharp lines of his jaw. He looked deep in thought, and I hesitated in the doorway, unsure if I should interrupt. You don't drink wine, do you? He asked without turning around, as if sensing my presence. No, I replied, stepping into the room. It's against my faith. He nodded, finally turning to face me. I figured as much. You're different. Is that a bad thing? I asked, a small smile tugging at my lips. Not at all, he said softly. It's refreshing. I busied myself by wiping down the counters, trying to ignore the way his words made my heart race. The tension in the room was palpable, and I could feel his eyes on me as I worked. Aaliyah, he said after a long silence. Yes? I replied, not looking up. Can we talk? I stopped wiping and turned to face him. About what? About us, he said, his voice low. I shook my head, my pulse quickening. There is no us, Zach. Then why can't I stop thinking about you? He asked, stepping closer. Zach, please, I began, but he interrupted me. I know it's wrong, he said, his voice trembling. I know I shouldn't feel this way, but I can't help it. I see you every day, taking care of my kids, making this house feel like a home, and He stopped, running a hand through his hair. I've never met anyone like you. My breath caught in my throat. His words were everything I tried to ignore, everything I told myself I didn't want to hear. But hearing them now, spoken aloud, made it impossible to deny what was happening between us. Zach, I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. You're married, you have a family. I know, he said, his eyes filled with pain. But Brianna is always gone, always busy, and when she's here, it's like we're strangers. You're the only one who makes me feel... He stopped again, as if the words were too difficult to say. I stood frozen, torn between the part of me that knew this was wrong and the part of me that longed to feel wanted, cherished, and seen. Zach, I whispered. But it wasn't a plea for him to stop. It was something else entirely. A surrender. He closed the distance between us, his lips capturing mine in a kiss that started gently, then deepened as we both gave in to the emotions we'd been fighting for so long. His hand slid down to my waist, pulling me closer, and I felt myself melting into him, forgetting everything else. Brianna, the children, my faith, my family. In that moment, there was only him. We didn't stop at a kiss that night. As the storm raged outside, we crossed a line we could never uncross. He led me upstairs to his bedroom, his touch igniting a fire within me I hadn't known existed. I let him undress me, his hands worshiping every inch of my body, as though I were something sacred. In his arms, I felt beautiful, powerful, and utterly free. It was nothing like I had imagined back home. Intimacy had always been a taboo subject, whispered about behind closed doors. But with Zach, it was different. He was attentive, patient, and passionate, making me feel things I had never felt before. I had never imagined it was possible, but for the first time, I truly felt wanted. After it ended, we lay tangled together, the sound of rain hitting the windows around us. I should have felt guilt, shame, maybe even disgust with myself, but I didn't. Instead, a strange sense of calm washed over me, as though I had finally discovered the missing part of myself. The following morning, reality hit me hard as I prepared breakfast for the children. I avoided looking at Zach, the weight of what we'd done hanging heavily on me. But when our eyes met and he gave me a small, knowing smile, I felt the same rush of excitement I had the night before. This didn't stop there. Over the following weeks, we kept finding time for each other, moments stolen whenever possible. A lingering touch as we passed, whispered conversations in the kitchen once the children were asleep, or a quick embrace behind closed doors. Every time I promised myself it would be the last, but it never was. Zach became my obsession, and I couldn't resist him. He made me forget everything. My beliefs, my upbringing, the principles I had once held so dear. For a time, I convinced myself we could keep going like this, living in our own little bubble, untouched by the world. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't last. And when it ended, it would only bring destruction. The days that followed felt like a blur, full of secret moments and whispered promises that filled my time with both pleasure and fear. Zach and I were cautious, yet reckless, carving out time to be together when Brianna was away, when the kids were asleep, or when the house was empty. Each time we touched, I promised myself it would be the last, but it never was. By day, I was Aaliyah, the devoted nanny reading bedtime stories, cooking meals, and smiling warmly at Splendor and Emmanuel. But by night, when the house was quiet and dark, I became someone else. Someone who belonged to Zach in a way I had never belonged to anyone before. One evening, after the children were in bed, Zach found me in the living room folding laundry. Brianna had left earlier for another work trip, and the house felt unusually quiet. He stood in the doorway, watching me, his presence filling the room before he spoke. "Do you ever stop working?" he asked, his voice laced with amusement. I looked up and smiled, despite myself. "Someone has to keep this place running." He crossed the room and sat next to me, his thigh brushing mine. "You're amazing, you know that?" I shook my head and laughed softly. "I'm just doing my job." "No," he said, his tone serious now. "You're more than that. You've done more for this family than Brianna or I ever could." The mention of her name made my guilt surge. I quickly turned my eyes away. "You shouldn't say that," I muttered. "Why not?" he asked. "You love her, Zach. She's your wife." He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "I do love her, but not the way I should. Not the way I love you." His words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, to remind him this was a mistake. But I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew I felt the same. He reached for my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine. "Aaliyah, look at me." Reluctantly, I lifted my eyes to meet his. The intensity in his gaze made my heart race. "You mean everything to me," he said. "I know this isn't right, but I can't imagine my life without you." Tears that had been building up spilled over, and he pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly as I cried. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I never meant for this to happen." "Neither did I," he said softly, "but I don't regret it." As the weeks turned into months, our affair became harder to keep secret. Brianna's frequent absences gave us the opportunity to continue our forbidden relationship. But when she was home, the guilt was unbearable. I avoided her whenever I could, ashamed to face her. She trusted me, was kind to me, and was completely unaware of the betrayal happening under her roof. "You've been such a blessing to this family," Brianna said one evening as we sat in the kitchen. "I don't know how we managed before you came along." Her words felt like a knife to my heart, but I forced a smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Jacob." "Please call me Brianna," she said, laughing lightly. "You're practically part of the family." Her trust deepened my guilt, but it didn't stop me. Each night after Brianna went to bed, Zach would find me. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we simply held each other in the silence of the house. More often than not, we ended up in his bed, tangled in passion that made me forget everything else. One night, after Brianna had left for a weekend conference, Zach and I shared a bottle of wine in the living room. I hadn't planned on drinking, but he insisted, pouring me a small glass and teasing me until I took a sip. The warmth of the wine loosened the tight grip on my self-control. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice slow and husky. "Do you know that?" I shook my head, feeling my cheeks flush. "You're just saying that." "No, I'm not," he said, leaning closer. "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." Before I could respond, he kissed me, his lips taking mine in a way that left no room for doubt. This wasn't just desire. It was something deeper, something neither of us could put into words. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer, and I felt myself surrender completely. We didn't make it to the bedroom that night. Instead, we stayed there on the living room floor, the flickering light of the fireplace casting shadows on the walls as we lost ourselves in each other. It was raw, unrestrained, and all-consuming. The next morning, I woke up in his arms, the events of the night replaying in my mind. I should have felt guilty, but all I felt was a strange sense of contentment. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I belonged. As I got dressed and prepared breakfast for the children, Zach came into the kitchen, his expression soft. "Good morning," he said, kissing my forehead. "Morning," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk," he said, his tone serious now. I nodded, knowing he was right. We couldn't keep pretending this wasn't happening. We couldn't keep living in this fantasy world we'd created. But even as I agreed, a part of me wasn't ready to let go. The days following that night passed in a haze. Zach and I became more reckless, consumed by the fire we had started. Each moment alone with him felt like a stolen treasure, a secret I both cherished and feared. Yet the more time we spent together, the heavier my guilt became. Brianna came home from her conference the following Monday, and her presence was a sharp reminder of the life we were dismantling piece by piece. She was as warm and cheerful as always, completely unaware of the betrayal unfolding behind her back. Watching her interact with the children made me feel deep shame. She didn't deserve this. None of them did. One evening, after Brianna had gone to bed, I sat on the porch steps, staring out at the darkened sky. The air was crisp, and the stars were scattered like tiny shards of glass. I wrapped my scarf tighter around my shoulders, trying to block out the chill and the thoughts swirling in my mind. Zach joined me moments later, his footsteps soft against the wooden floor. He sat down beside me, close enough that our shoulders brushed. "You've been quiet," he said, his voice low. "I've been thinking," I replied, not looking at him. "About us?" he asked. I nodded, my throat tight. "Zach, we can't keep doing this," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know it's complicated." "It's not just complicated," I interrupted, my voice trembling. "It's wrong. You have a wife, a family, and I've lost myself in this. I don't even recognize." He reached for my hand, his touch gentle. "You're still you, Aaliyah," he said softly. "You're the woman who loves my children as if they're your own, the one who's brought life back to this house. Don't let this ruin everything." I pulled my hand away, tears welling up in my eyes. "But it has, Zach," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Don't you see? We've destroyed everything." For the first time, I saw his composure falter. "I love you, Aaliyah," he said, his voice trembling. "I can't lose you." His words pierced me deeply. I loved him too. There was no denying it anymore. But love alone couldn't undo the damage we'd caused. "I love you too," I murmured, the words slipping out before I could stop them. But it's tearing me apart. The following week, I made a decision. I knew I couldn't stay. Not like this. The burden of what we had done was too heavy to carry, and I couldn't keep living in a house built on lies. I started secretly looking for a new job, reaching out to agencies and families in need of a nanny. It wasn't easy. I had grown attached to Splendor and Emmanuel, and the thought of leaving them broke my heart, but I knew it was the only way to save myself. One evening, as I tucked Splendor into bed, she gazed up at me with her large blue eyes and asked, "Aaliyah, are you leaving?" Her question caught me off guard. "Why would you think that, sweetheart?" I asked. "Because you've been sad," she replied simply. "And Daddy says people leave when they're sad." I forced a smile, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "I'm not going anywhere right now, Splendor. Go to sleep, okay?" She nodded, her eyes closing. But as I left the room, her words stayed with me. People leave when they're sad. She was right. I was leaving because I couldn't stay in a place that had become a prison I'd created for myself. 2 weeks later, I handed in my resignation. Brianna was shocked, her face a mix of confusion and worry. "Aaliyah, is everything okay?" she asked, setting her coffee cup down on the counter. "Yes, Mrs. Jacob," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "I've been offered another position, and I think it's time for me to move on." She looked genuinely hurt. "You've been such an important part of this family. Are you sure about this?" I nodded, unable to look her in the eyes. "I'm sure." Zach didn't say much when I told him. He just nodded, his jaw tight and his eyes filled with emotions I couldn't place. Anger, sadness, regret. "I can't change your mind, can I?" he asked quietly. "No," I said firmly. "I have to do this." The day I left was bittersweet. Splendor and Emmanuel clung to me, their tearful goodbyes breaking my heart. Brianna hugged me tightly, thanking me for everything I'd done for their family. Zach stood silently by the door, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. As I loaded my suitcase into the taxi, a strange sense of relief washed over me. The house, which had been both my refuge and my prison, slowly disappeared in the distance as the car pulled away. I didn't know what the future held, but I was certain of one thing. I had to rediscover myself. I had to reconnect with the faith and values I had abandoned, and I needed to forgive myself for everything. That night, in the small apartment I rented across town, I knelt on the floor and prayed. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. I wasn't perfect and I had made mistakes, but I was ready to start over.